As a final contribution to this Advent calendar, I thought I'd have a look at a couple of the translations that you can get of the Luke Nativity. I've chosen 3 that have the word new in their title. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're particularly new, given how old the King James originally was, but it gives you a sense that they are trying to be fresh in some way for some audience. What was difficult about the Greek? How did the translations cope with that? And what might be characteristic of each translation? I'm just going to make a few comments here, but it gives you a way to start thinking about when you're reading a translation, what kind of things might you be looking out for. We've got the verses where the shepherds come and find Mary and Joseph and the brephos, the infant, lying in the manger. They see, they understand what's been spoken about the child, this child. Everyone who's heard is amazed at what has been spoken by the shepherds to them. Mary ponders all of these things in her heart. The shepherds return glorifying and praising God for everything which they'd heard and seen as it was said to them. That's a paraphrased translation version of the Greek. What have we got? We've got different ways of dealing with the kais. We've seen how many times Luke starts a sentence with kai, and different translations will deal with that differently. So your kai turns up as so or and you can see later on a similar issue has happened. In verse 20, that kai has turned up as a then. In 18, it's turned up as an and in the King James. It's clearly marking them in a way that other translations aren't. You've also got little issues like elalethe, it was spoken to them. That's what you've got in the NRSV, and that's what you've got in the King James, but the New English version, just as they had been told. It's still passive, it's a different way round. It's not being told to them, they are being told it. So we're still using the passive, which is relatively unusual in English, but it's been turned into slightly more natural English. You've also got in the King James a concern that there are lots of missing objects in this text. So you've got when they'd seen him, pondered them, heard it. Those words in italics aren't present in the Greek in any expressed way, and therefore the King James knows that we need an object there, but has marked out in English that they've supplied a word there. If you look back at the video on verse 19, I talked a little bit about what it meant for Mary to gather all those words and ponder them in her heart. So let's have a look at what we've got. We've got Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. Mary treasured up all these words, pondering in her heart what they might mean. So we've got a bit more of an explanation there. But Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. So the 2 more modern versions both understand sunterio as treasure. It's the gathering up in a fairly value-laden fashion, whereas the King James has still just got kept them all. What none of them have been able to do is get across the force of the imperfect in Greek. That is an imperfect, which gives you the ongoing sense of Mary trying to think about these things. So all of the English versions have lost something of the process of what's going on here. If we think about those active and passive things again, we've also got hupotompoimenon in the Greek, and that turns into what the shepherds told them, what the shepherds had said, and told them by the shepherds. Only the New King James maintains the passive there. So there's a general move towards changing passives to actives in a lot of translations, and you can see that here. What does it do? Well, it very much changes the balance of giver and receiver of the words, and that changes to some degree the chain that we've had from the angels and the shepherds and Mary and Joseph. So it may be more logical grammar, but it disrupts the flow that we've seen with laleo and rema to some degree. All translation is going to be a balancing act of what you gain and what you lose by making all of these decisions. How do you deal with particles? How do you deal with colloquial phrases? How do you reflect the way in which Greek can use its tenses, the don't directly map onto English ones? How do you deal with grammatical features like the passive that are much more comfortable in Greek than they are in English? All of these issues are there, even as this short passage, and that's just a few things without even looking at the major lexical levels to say, have a look at these passages, think about what the reading experience is like. For example, does it make a difference to have footnotes like in the New English version? Think about how that changes the way you read it, and think about what it is that you would like to see if you were trying to understand the Greek better.